Darryl, thanks for being with us. A little, I guess, for starters, on how did you determine that these Vermont tribes were actually made up of non-First Nations people?
What I did is I did their genealogies, and so there's a program in Quebec. It's called the Research Program for Historical Demography. It runs out of the University of Montreal. It has existed now for over 50 years, since the late 60s. And essentially it reconstructs the genealogy of French descendants. And when I say French descendants, I mean individuals who count among their primary ancestors, the first settlers in New France. I'm one of them, all sort of French Canadians in Canada would be one of those French descendants. And so I use this program, which has actually digitized about 2 million records between 1620 and 1850. And so that was a fairly straightforward thing to do. They named their ancestors from the middle of the 1800s. I found them in this database because they're mostly French Canadian. About 90% of their ancestors are French Canadian. Sometimes they're Germans. Sometimes they're, in a couple cases, there's two German or / Dutch families that come from the sort of Hudson Valley, so further towards New York. But for almost all of them, their ancestors are Quebecois immigrants to Vermont in the middle of the 1800s. And so I did this complete genealogy of all these families and discovered that according to their 2005 records that they submitted as part of this federal acknowledgement process, 98% of their members have no Abenaki ancestry whatsoever. There are, I think it's 16 members in 2005 who they used for the first time in any of their membership records who do have some Abenaki ancestry and are actually tied to the community at Odanak, which is sort of the center of Abenaki life today. And that's in sort of southern Quebec, not too far from Montreal, but an hour and a half east of Montreal.
So Darryl, why should we and the Odanak Abenaki care if they have tribal recognition in Vermont?
What is happening is the state of Vermont, when, for instance, there are different forms of construction projects and there are human remains that are found. And so, sometimes archaeologists will be called to, test sort of carbon date those remains or the grounds around them. And if they're determined to be the remains of people who are indigenous to that territory, those groups get to inter those remains. They're not returned to the actual Abenaki people. And part of the reason that is, and this is one of the things that people at Odanak have expressed a lot of concern about, is that their ancestors, their people, are being returned to fake Abenakis, right, who then can do whatever they want with them. They can rebury them according to whatever pretend ceremonies that they've invented. We're not exactly sure what it is that they do with them, but the state is not recognizing the fact that these groups should not have access to the remains of actual Abenaki people and are sort of giving them those remains. And so the people of Odanak, the earliest that I've seen that they brought this to the attention of the state of Vermont is a letter from the chief in 2003 his name was Gilles Obamsawin. And he wrote a letter to the state in 2003 saying that these people are not us. They're not Odanak. They're not Abenaki. They've never demonstrated to us how they came to those claims, and it's just wrong that you're returning the remains of our ancestors to them. There are other sort of benefits that these groups, I guess, are entitlements that they get. There's the, as of, I think it was 2020, they have access now to hunting and fishing in the territory. They don't have to pay for a particular license like other people in Vermont.
Now, Darryl, you've often called this appropriation of Indigenous identity race shifting. What are some ways that Indigenous people can put a stop to it?
One of the things that Odanak has done is they've created a committee whose role it is to do this work, to essentially fight back against false claims to being Abenaki, because they don't just happen in Vermont and New Hampshire, they also happen in Quebec. There are a number of different groups that work with the groups in Vermont and New Hampshire who call themselves Abenaki but aren't at all. And so it's kind of an ongoing work just to kind of to survey the landscape, if you will, of the organizations who are doing this type of harm, and then to come up with a strategy. And I think the people of Odanak and Wolanak through their tribal council, have been really good at bringing together ideas and sort of strategies. And so they respond to the types of claims that are being made in a very proactive way. And so it's been sort of really a good learning experience for me, at least. I've been to Odanak a couple times to speak about my research findings since 2018, to learn from them about the struggles that they've undertaken and really the harms that this movement in New England and also in Quebec is bringing to them as Abenaki people.
Darryl, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us. Good to see you.
Thank you so much.